We are in March 845. The sun rises over the Seine, a few kilometers from Paris.
It's spring, so you have to imagine the morning mist. And you can imagine the prows of the many Viking ships moving through this milky mist. There are dozens and dozens of ships.
The chronicles tell us that there are about 120 of them. So 120 is a lot. That's about 5,000, 6,000 people, since you can fit about 50 people on one of these boats. And they are heading towards Paris.
The reputation of these exceptional sailors is ominous, and the Parisians realize they have no chance. They're facing death.
This attack in 845 is reportedly carried out by a certain Ragnarius. It's the Latin transcription of Ragnar.
It's a name that already instills fear in the minds of Christians, because he's known as a warlord who ravages and plunders the northwest of France.
He is an important war leader that the Franks cannot overlook, for sure. In the middle of the 9th century, the kingdom of Western Francia is governed by a young king, Charles the Bald. According to legend, this encounter between the Franks and the Vikings, led by Ragnar, was be merciless.
Charles the Bald manages to raise an army. And he decides to wait for them a little upstream from Paris. There, the Frankish army is spread across both banks. The Vikings, upon arriving, made the strategic choice to attack one of the two camps.
The Vikings never show mercy. Never. And to clearly demonstrate that they are determined to fight once and for all, they have managed to capture several dozen soldiers, and in front of King Charles's army, they execute, literally massacre, the prisoners. So the message is clear: what awaits you is death. And panic quickly spreads among King Charles's troops. The king flees, leaving his city to a dreadful fate, that is, to death, pillage, rape, and murder.
For more than half a century, Viking attacks have spread throughout Europe, and the strategy of these men from the north is terribly effective. In the early Viking era, they used a technique called strandvåg. It literally means a raid on the shore. Their technique is simple. They land unexpectedly, sometimes taking advantage of the time of mass or a particular moment, because they are very well informed. They rush in. They destroy absolutely everything they can. And then, once they have everything they want, they set fire because it disrupts any kind of counterattack, and they leave as quickly as possible.
These are people who arrive and kill someone with an axe blow, whether it's a woman, a man, or a child. Imagine you're in your daily life and this happens, but it's horrible, and they behave like that. They are great specialists in psychological warfare. They understood that one of their assets was fear. So, it manifests through noises made by banging on one's shield, through shouts, through a very martial, very provocative, very violent attitude.
These Vikings are giants. They're shaggy, bearded with deep, icy blue eyes. They have painted eyes. They are generally tattooed. They have large beards, sometimes braided, long hair. They are extremely strong, and they seem to fear nothing, absolutely nothing.
Ragnar's warriors can also rely on their particularly formidable weapons. The Montfleury Castle, located in Savoy, is an old fortified house from the 13th century. Inside is the most important private collection in Europe of military archaeology. Thanks to the research work of historians like Nicolas Baptiste, we can better envision Viking weaponry.
So here, we typically have what makes up a Viking warrior's gear at the time. For example, of the Siege of Paris. We have authentic, very rare, exceptional items. Like this sword here, it comes from Lithuania. It was found in a grave. That's what makes these objects bear the markings of centuries. They are oxidized, they have lost elements. But thanks to today's reconstructions, we can get an idea of what they looked like new when they were made by craftsmen. This sword, for example, was made respecting the constructions of pieces from the era, that is, a mix of iron and steel, black iron and white steel. This makes it a very, very flexible, very manageable, and very sharp weapon. So, an iconic weapon of the Viking arsenal is, of course, the Viking axe. Here, we have a small example, of course, in an archaeological state. This reconstruction shows the length of the handle. It's important to realize that Viking axes are not like our axes for cutting wood in the forest. These are weapons equipped with a wooden handle, generally quite long. This allows for a wide swing, especially to reach behind the opponent's shield, or even hook it to pull the opponent towards you so that your friends on the sides can attack him. Some Viking warriors wielded the spear. It was really designed to reach the opponent from afar and to stab, to keep them at a distance. It also allows for fencing by pushing against the opponent's spear, looking for an opening and targeting weaknesses in the body. With their shield, it's the perfect combo to fight. Most of these weapons are light, designed for expeditions and to carry several on oneself and be truly effective against an opponent.
And Vikings did not have horned helmets. Imagine if they had. When they were attacked, in the best-case scenario, the horns would have exploded on the first blow. In the worst-case scenario, they could have torn off the head and fractured the skull of the person wearing them. It is therefore certain that Viking helmets did not have horns. During the raids, Ragnar can also rely on extraordinary warriors whose behavior remains very mysterious. They are the Berserkir, literally the bear shirts, better known as berserkers.
Their peculiarity is that they arrive almost naked, with only an animal's skin covering them. They are warriors who stand on the front line of battles, so they are very brave and very strong people.
They are warriors capable of going into a trance, an ecstatic trance, which multiplies their strength, making them more or less invulnerable to the iron of a sword or to fire, and making them resemble fierce beasts. They let out wild cries. So, their warrior fury is extremely dangerous. And the most astonishing thing is that it occurs out of the blue.
So, they are some sort of madmen who rush at their enemies, capable of biting and tearing them apart. It's something absolutely terrifying.
It is with this formidable army that Ragnar attacks Paris on March 28, 845. He first devastates the suburbs of the city and the monasteries. Charles the Bald can no longer retreat. It is imperative to stop this wave of violence, especially since Ragnar is now at the gates of the Abbey of Saint-Denis. Not only is it filled with priceless treasures, but it is also highly symbolic, as it houses the tombs of the most illustrious ancestors of the Carolingian king.
On the side of King Charles the Bald and his troops, the psychological effect is significant. They discuss, and apparently, not everyone is ready to go back into battle against these Vikings. So Charles decides to pay these people to leave. The Franks delivered to the Vikings 7,000 pounds of silver metal, an absolutely colossal sum for the time. That represented a little less than 3 tons of precious metal. The sum is so colossal and given without a fight that it can be considered a true political mistake, for it sort of means, you have free reign, come back whenever you want. We will give you money, and, moreover, you'll have nothing to fear. This spectacular tribute is certainly at the origin of the myth of this great Viking chief. But how did Ragnar's reputation cross borders and give rise to the legend that still lives on today? At the time, it was mainly the monks, victims of these attacks, who recounted to us the terrible raids of Ragnar. It is in Iceland that these raids, over the centuries, take on an almost legendary turn. The Viking tales give rise to a new literary genre, the sagas.
The Icelandic sagas tell the lives of Viking kings and lords. They date from the 13th century. They were written to preserve a written record of their ancestors' past, because until that moment, these traces were only oral. They were passed down from generation to generation, but nothing was written. And so, literate Icelanders decided to write these stories.
Among these sagas, one reveals the story of an extraordinary character, that of a great leader who became a legend, Ragnar Lodbrok. In this saga, Ragnar is presented as the son of the King of Denmark, Sigurd Ring. So, he is described as very tall, particularly intelligent, obviously very handsome, as one would expect. He is said to be ruthless towards his enemies, but particularly brotherly with those he considers his friends.
He has incredible courage. He fears nothing and sees the adventure through to the end. He is exceptional in every sense of the word.
Ragnar, in fact, is a very complex character. We tend to say legendary character, which means he never existed. But on the other hand, one could say there is no smoke without fire. And if a certain number of texts mention this same Ragnar, we might think there is a body of evidence showing the existence of one or more characters who could have inspired this figure that became mythical over time.
The story of this mythical figure has reached us thanks to a manuscript now kept at the Royal Library of Denmark. This document dates from the 14th century.
It is a typical Icelandic manuscript, bound with wooden boards. And this manuscript is truly exceptional, as it is the only one that contains the Saga of Ragnar in its entirety. It is so valuable that it must be handled with great care. This manuscript, when you open it like this, there is no title. It starts directly with text. And then suddenly, starting from page 51, we have this beautiful illumination, the letter H of the first word that appears there. And a title that we can guess today because it is very faded, Saga Ragnar's Lothbrogr. That is to say, it is the beginning of the saga of Ragnar Lodbrok. The legend of Ragnar Lodbrok was probably composed at the end of the 12th century in the Scottish Islands by an anonymous poet who had heard, among other things, about this famous Ragnar who sailed up the Seine to Paris for the first time in 845, but who is also inspired by other events. He is still a character who became legendary, and an Icelander took up the legend to write a saga on this theme of Ragnar. And it's this saga that I currently have in my hands.
a saga that tells not only of the great exploits of the famous Ragnar Lodbrok, his romantic conquests, but also the incredible story of his illustrious sons, a dynasty that, according to this legend, shook all of Europe for several decades.
Every hero needs an achievement. Ragnar, of course, is no exception to the rule. But what an exploit! He's been told that in a certain country there is an abominable monster ravaging the population. And what is this monster? It is a serpent. A serpent that was not always so enormous, but was given as a strange gift to a young princess who is obviously ravishing and is named Sora.
As it grew, the serpent became more and more aggressive. Now uncontrollable, it holds the princess captive, to her father's great despair.
And the king of the land, as in all tales, as in all sagas, promises his daughter's hand in marriage and the treasure that goes with it, to the brave man who manages to slay the beast.
For Ragnar, freeing the princess from this voracious reptile is the perfect opportunity to stand out from the other great warriors. It is on a beautiful morning that he decides to set out alone to face the serpent. But before the battle, he makes himself makeshift armor. Ragnar has some rather special clothes made, composed of a braque and a coat made of animal hair, probably goat hair, something like that.
He covers it with a kind of pitch made from pine beans, which is sticky and gooey. And then he goes to the enclosure and attacks the serpent. The serpent spits on him, tries to kill him with its venom, but his clothes covered in pitch protect him, and he can thrust his spear into the serpent's mouth as it struggles. The wood breaks. The tip remains in its head, and he leaves.
The king of the land is overjoyed. The serpent is dead. Let us rejoice.
And that earns him the nickname Lodbrok, since Lodbrok means hairy brocky, so full of hair. And it's interesting because they decided to give this man a name that reflects his intelligence more than his physical strength.
Ragnar proved his worth. To thank him for saving his daughter, the king keeps his promise. He offers the hero the treasure, and especially the hand of the beautiful Thora. You have to imagine, it's a festivity lasting several days. All the cousins, family members, and clan members from far and wide are invited.
During the wedding ceremony, the guests offered the newlyweds the equivalent of 1 month in the quantity of a beer brewed, especially for the occasion, mixed with honey, which will later give rise to the term honeymoon.
The young couple, already very much in love with each other, celebrate their union in general joy. The saga glorifies the marriage of Ragnar and Thora, making it a beautiful love story, but unfortunately in Viking marriages, it was not always like that. Far from it.
In the Viking era, marriages were arranged. What mattered was money and the connections that could be made with other families.
It is always an economic political alliance above all. And besides, we often find in the sagas the expression that says, they married, then love came.
It is in Denmark, the homeland of Ragnar, that the couple settles. For it is here, in Scandinavia, that the Vikings reside, and their life is organized. One must imagine these different countries, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, not as well-formed entities, but rather as a myriad of small independent states from one another.
These are lordly units that can cover relatively vast territories, but do not exceed a county, the equivalent of a county, a region. And among them, they have political rivalries, political agreements, sometimes to unite for something, sometimes to fight.
Each of these states is governed by a king or a jarl, a pillar of the community. This leader rules unchallenged over a territory and its inhabitants, with whom he must be both fair and generous.
We are in a society of free men. That's the term they use themselves. Every man is free. But there are men richer than others, and those have the power.
They could be compared to counts or dukes, depending on the attitude. And they are large landowners, often people who own boats, which allows them to charter in their name important expeditions.
And so, a warrior fights for a chief or a small king as long as there is something to gain from it. And a good chief is also one who rewards the men who are loyal to him, who have fought by his side.
So, it's a kind of reciprocity. The leader takes them on an expedition, and they, in return, must receive a share of the wealth that is acquired during this expedition. But a leader of his stature also needs a place to assert his strength and power in the eyes of all.
The Jarls have built a large hall, a big building, and in this big building they hold banquets. They hold grand receptions to reward those who support them.
But during which also bonds are formed or previous alliances are strengthened. So these are places of conviviality, of sociability, but they are also political places in a sense.
The one who owns a hall of this importance really wants to impress his peers.
In Leisra, Denmark, archaeologists have identically reconstructed the largest royal hall in Scandinavia, a spectacular building whose original dates back to the 8th century.
It's a hall with gigantic dimensions, 61 meters long, 15 meters wide, and 12 meters high. The construction took 2 years with 500 people working full-time and required 700 century-old oaks.
At each of its ends, sculpted animal heads protect the building. To the east, 2 ravens that, every morning, set out to explore the world. To the west, 2 wolves that defended against the darkness at sunset. But what ceremony is reserved for the visitor who must meet a Viking chief like Ragnar?
Here we take the path of those who visited the king. The first room is the armory where weapons were deposited, as well as means of transport, like a sled here. We enter here into a larger room where one waits for their turn to access the throne room. Like the 400 guests who can gather in this room, we finally arrive at the throne room. We walk along the long fire. And there, the visitors sit on the south side, facing the king and queen on the throne on the north side. Here we have the double throne, which features a series of heroic scenes to reinforce the king's power and ends decorated with monsters to protect the royal power. We can also call the throne room the Room of the 4 Columns. These columns were carved in the heart of these 200-year-old oaks in a very detailed manner while the oak was green. Then it was left to dry for a few years before being covered with paint that enhanced all these intertwined figures.
Among these figures, there are several motifs and symbols related to the beliefs of the Scandinavian people, beliefs that hold a central place in their lives.
The mythological universe of the ancient Scandinavians is divided into 9 worlds around a cosmic tree called Yggdrasil, which is an ash tree whose roots draw from the depth of the underground realms and whose branches rise up to the stars.
How can one imagine a world resting on a plant? It shows the deep communion these people have with the spirits of nature. Everything can have magical value. Everything can have the value of communion with the gods.
The Vikings believe in a multitude of gods and goddesses, with the main figures being Thor and Odin.
Odin is a very curious character, very clever. He is the one who masters magic. He gave one of his eyes to gain absolute knowledge. He is always armed with a spear, escorted by 2 wolves, and he has 2 ravens that constantly fly over the world to report back to him what is happening there.
Next to Odin, there is, of course, the absolute master of war. And it is Thor, the master of thunder, lightning, and flashes. Thor and his hammer. Thor, who is prayed to by warriors at the moment of combat and celebrated when swords strike shields. Thor, who leads to victory.
When Ragnar leads his men into battle, the important thing is not actually victory or spoils, but to die in battle, sword in hand. A glorious death that leads to Valhalla, the paradise of every warrior, embodied by Odin's great hall where one gains eternal life.
Every day, they go out, they fight, some die. They are resurrected afterward, and then they feast with Odin. The Valkyries serve them drinks, and then they start again. And it goes on like this until the end of the world.
It's extraordinary to see that. The sacred triangle is the struggle, the drink, the good food, and I would say in the middle, the extraordinary pride of being a man and embodying this perpetual virility.
But in everyday life, Ragnar's men ensure the favor of their powerful deity with sacrifices made in ponds, set apart from dwellings. These are sacred places. In Lair, one of them has been reconstructed today.
In Scandinavia, the Viking era is the end of prehistory, and in reality, animals and the entire natural world, the forces, still hold a very strong symbolic role. It may happen that these people at that time sacrificed livestock, even luxury animals like horses, whose carcass they could skin and hang their hide on a stake at the edge of a bog. It's like an offering, like a visible gift from the world of the living. It was also possible to sacrifice humans there for a long time. Written sources mention ritual sacrifices every 9 years in the depths of winter in January, with 99 people sacrificed along with almost as many animals associated with this sacrifice. So, did it happen every 9 years over a long period? Or did we just remember one sacrifice at one time? There is nothing certain. It was a society quite uncertain about its destiny, preparing for it, but wanting to satisfy the gods to have the best chances on its side.
But these gods did not spare Ragnar from misfortune. After only a few years of marriage, his wife Thora falls gravely ill. No remedy or sacrifice can save her, and Ragnar watches helplessly as his beloved fades away. Mad with grief, he then gives her a funeral worthy of his love for her.
Among the Vikings, death is sacred. Needless to say, funerals are an eminently privileged moment in Scandinavian culture. She therefore wore her finest attire, her most beautiful dress, her most beautiful cloak. She was made up, adorned, her hair decorated with flowers, gold circles, crowns. And around her, they put her most precious objects, those that accompany her in her way to afterlife. And they also sacrifice to the god to ease the passage and nourish her soul in this great and perpetual journey of sacrificed animals. But also, there can be human sacrifices.
During Thora's funeral, Ragnar appoints a slave to accompany his wife into the afterlife and serve her for eternity. But the tragic loss of the one he loved leaves him distraught.
And their love is such that when poor Thora dies, Ragnar's grief is immense. And to avoid dying from it, he chose other adventures to forget his pain of losing the love of his life.
We are thousands of kilometers from Scandinavia, in the east, in the heart of a market. How surprised these merchants must have been when they saw Ragnar and these Viking warriors wandering through the crowd.
The great paradox is imagining a Ragnar who has set aside the helmet, sword, and shield, wandering like that, in a southern market, for example. The climate is different, the colors are different, the smells are different. It's dazzling for him, it piques his curiosity. Ragnar should not be considered exclusively as a war leader engaging in looting or raids. In fact, Ragnar is also a trader.
A Viking is both a merchant and a pirate, depending a little on the circumstances. Depending on the opportunities that present themselves, he trades or he plunders, and the two are closely linked. Once loot is gathered, it must be sold, it must be moved.
In the time of the Vikings, men from the north took two main trade routes. One headed west, skirting the British Isles, following the coasts to the Mediterranean. On the other side, they cross the Baltic Sea and use a vast network of waterways to traverse all of Eastern Europe. Their presence becomes permanent in certain places thanks to the trading posts they establish, like Dublin in Ireland or Kiev in present-day Ukraine.
Viking traders created a true trade network across all of Europe, reaching the Black Sea, Constantinople, and the Arab world. So they created a bridge between the East and the West, a commercial and cultural bridge.
What Ragnar wants to buy, by bargaining it for Vikings, are skilled negotiators, steel, iron, ointments, perfumes, incense,
precious fabrics, glassware, wine, salt, everything the Scandinavian elite wants and needs.
Archaeological excavations have allowed us to discover valuable goods that are now preserved in Stockholm at the Swedish History Museum.
This exhibition brings together thousands of objects that testify to the exchanges between the Vikings and foreign merchants from distant countries. In this display case, we have some very beautiful specimens. For example, this small Buddha statuette comes from present-day Pakistan. It was made in the 6th century, but found at a Viking archaeological site here in Sweden. When it was discovered, it had a small leather strap that was likely used to carry or hang it somewhere. It was extremely important for the Vikings to bring back from their travels this type of object that showed they were powerful, had contacts, and were wealthy. At that time, it was essential to possess valuable objects to offer them to those with whom one wanted to seal alliances and thus strengthen one's power.
Among the other objects brought back from the East, archaeologists discovered in Sweden thousands of coins from the Arab Caliphate.
These coins, once in Scandinavia, did not have a nominal value as they do today, but the Vikings weighed these silver coins with their scales, and when they wanted to buy something that was worth only half a coin, they would cut the coin in two.
This silver is often melted down and transformed by goldsmiths into jewelry, like these bracelets. But to buy these precious metals that Ragnar's men are so fond of, they bring with them many goods of their own making.
Among the goods that are exchanged, indeed, there are the riches of the north, such as amber, furs, walrus, ivory, since ivory from Africa becomes increasingly rare.
They trade bone, honey, tin, reindeer wood. The carved reindeer antlers make very, very beautiful objects.
The idea is to buy what you cannot produce at home and to sell what others cannot produce at theirs.
And on the way, Ragnar and his men take advantage of the raids to supply their ship with another highly sought-after commodity.
During their raid, the Vikings brought back slaves from the Frankish world, from Ireland as well, which was a major supplier, and then also and especially from Eastern Europe.
Two purposes for these slaves. They help in the northern lands, in Scandinavia, women and men, but also they have market value, and they are sold in the eastern markets. So, Ragnar knew that by arriving with 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 slaves of both sexes, he would make an extremely lucrative trade and have that much more money for other goods.
If they can transport so many men and goods so far, it is also thanks to a major asset that only the Vikings possess: their ship.
History shows us that, as a general rule, when a culture dominates others in trade, for example, it is always because it has a technical tool that others do not have.
The genius of the Vikings is to take advantage of another genius, that of carpenters, cabinet makers, blacksmiths, all these exceptional beings who truly pool their talents to invent this boat, which is a small miracle of craftsmanship and technical skill. No ship, no Viking.
Yet, after the Viking era, these renowned ships disappear and fall into oblivion. At the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde, Denmark, scientists and craftsmen have succeeded in reviving this exceptional expertise to rebuild a true fleet. This morning, Martin is finalizing the construction of this 14-meter-long ship, a project that required more than 12,000 hours of work.
Here, I am refining this wood. I am peeling off some pieces. It will become a plank for the inside of the boat. We only work with traditional tools. All these axes have been reconstructed from archaeological discoveries dating back to the Viking era. Over the course of the projects, we tried to understand how the Vikings used their tools. This axe, for example, is excellent for this task. Its blade is flat on one side and curved on the other, and the handle is slightly offset, which prevents injury when striking. That's really very clever. It's important to have these Viking tools because they are the only ones suitable for making these boats.
With these ingenious tools, the Viking carpenters create the centerpiece of their ship, the hull, and for its structure, they develop a revolutionary technique, the clinker-built method.
Clinker-built planking allows for boards to overlap like steps. This makes the hull extremely strong and at the same time flexible. Thus, the boat conforms to the shape of the waves.
This site was initially founded following a major archaeological discovery. In 1962, 5 wrecks were found at the bottom of the water. Among them is this large warship, 30 meters long and capable of carrying 70 men. It informs us about the maritime superiority of the Vikings. And once again, it is the hull that makes the big difference.
Look underneath this wreck. You can notice the shallow draft of these ships. With this hull, the Vikings could navigate in very shallow waters, where one would not suspect that a warship of this size could dock. And that is their great military advantage. They could thus appear out of nowhere and bring their warriors very close to the shores or onto the beaches. These raids carried out on these almost amphibious boats terrified everyone. These Viking attacks were formidable. In the 7th century, one of the major revolutions was the introduction of the sail. It allowed the Scandinavians to expand their trade network by traveling much farther and also to conduct military operations on a larger scale. What is strange is that they have known this technology for a long time. They simply waited more than 500, even 600 years before using the sail. So why did they continue rowing for so long? It remains a great mystery.
The introduction of the sail remains a mystery, but one thing is certain. Thanks to it, these ships entered into legend and enabled the Viking expansion of great warrior leaders like Ragnar.
On June 24th, 843, the Vikings sail up the Loire and arrive in Nantes, taking the city by surprise. It is St. John's Day, and everyone is celebrating in the cathedral.
They attack on a holy day. A holy day is a day when people are not ready to defend themselves and are all gathered in the same place. They arrive in this cathedral and carry out a massacre. They kill men, women, children, and they behead Bishop Gohar on his altar.
These are truly devils arriving. They are the knights of the apocalypse. They respect nothing, really nothing.
The psychological impact on the local population was very strong, and now people are starting to be really afraid.
Fear spreads among the Frankish people, especially since for several decades they have not really experienced war or aggression. At the beginning of the 9th century, the Carolingian Empire is ruled with an iron fist by Charlemagne. At the height of his reign, the territory is vast. It stretches from the North Sea to the Mediterranean, covering nearly half of Europe.
Under Charlemagne, the Vikings attempt incursions, but they are repelled. Charlemagne is fully aware of the danger they pose, and sets up a whole system of protection on the coasts of Francia that prevents the Vikings from passing, which means the Vikings do not come.
In contrast, upon Charlemagne's death, the situation changes, especially from the 840s. After the death of Charlemagne's son, Louis the Pious, the successors fight over power.
And there, the problem is a triple problem. 3 princes, Lothair, Louis, and Charles. 3 brothers, 3 grandsons of Charlemagne, who do not get along at all, and who engage in a series of conflicts, of war.
And it is only in 843, seeing that they achieve nothing, that they meet in Verdun and sign an agreement.
Louis the German receives East Francia. Charles the Bald receives West Francia. And Lothair has to settle for the long strip between the two called Middle Francia. But the dissensions between these brothers and their descendants will continue.
And obviously, when you need all your troops to fight against an enemy, even if it's a brother, well, you strip all your military resources from the other fronts.
The Vikings are aware of these dissensions and the crisis in the Frankish Empire in the 830s has been linked to the increase in Viking attacks. They attack repeatedly and in multiple locations.
Ragnar understood that by launching these hordes, there would be no one to oppose them, no resistance. And that is truly Ragnar's genius, being able to identify the precise moment to strike.
In the Seine Valley, the Vikings also take advantage of the political crisis among Charlemagne's successors to carry out their first raids, and among the victims are mainly the monasteries that line the river.
We are here in the ruins of the Abbey of Jumièges, reputed to be one of the most beautiful ruins in France, according to Victor Hugo. It is a mix of Romanesque, Gothic, and also Carolingian architecture. So, it is a complex that is now very ruined, because during the Revolution, it was sold as national property and was dismantled stone by very unscrupulous merchants. We are here in the oldest part of the Jumièges Abbey, the Saint Pierre Church. It dates back to the Carolingian era. You can notice this from the large arches you see here, the spaces for medallions on the upper floor, and then at the very top, the beautiful twin windows that we admire and that are absolutely magnificent. And it is there, exactly there, that the Vikings passed in 841, when for the first time they carried out a significant raid in the Seine Valley. Just after the attack, you have to imagine devastated, unusable buildings. It is no longer possible for the monks to stay here, and they emigrated. Before the Viking raids, there were about 20 large monasteries in what would later become Normandy. When the Viking raids ended, none remained. All the communities had scattered to the 4 corners of the kingdom.
Since Charlemagne, the church is the most sacred thing. Everyone is absolutely dominated by Christian religious thought. And the idea of attacking this religion is completely unthinkable, and the monks really do not expect it.
The Vikings know this very well. They are not Christians, and so they attack monasteries, they attack churches.
The monks are not armed. The monasteries are not defended. There are plenty of riches that can be easily acquired, so why wouldn't they?
Ragnar has been sailing along the Norwegian coasts for several months now. That day, the Viking chief decides to stop in a small bay to resupply. As soon as he lands, Ragnar sends 2 of his men to get bread. they are slow to return and finally come back empty-handed.
So they return to the ship a little sheepishly. They apologize a bit to Ragnar, and they say to him, "Well, yes, but we were so captivated by such beauty that we forgot the bread that was baking."
And at that moment, Ragnar raises an eyebrow. "Oh, really? You saw such a pretty young girl. Even more beautiful than that, Lord. She is absolutely magnificent." And Ragnar thinks, "I want to see her."
But Ragnar is cunning, and he wants not only a beautiful woman, certainly, but he also wants an intelligent woman. So he uses a little trick. He poses a riddle to her. He asks that she come neither dressed nor undressed, neither hungry nor full, and that she be neither alone nor accompanied.
The next morning, this woman appears before Ragnar. She says her name is Kraka, she is an orphan, and she is determined to prove her great intelligence to him.
And when she is facing a Ragnar already charmed, already fascinated by her beauty, she says to him, "You see, I am not completely dressed, but I am not naked. I am wearing a net. I have not been completely fed, but you can see that I had a tiny piece of onion, and here is the dog accompanying me, so I am not alone."
One imagines Ragnar charmed by the cleverness of this young girl, who knows how to answer his riddle, and, in addition to such beauty, he does not hesitate and asks her to marry him.
Kraka agrees, but what Ragnar does not know is that the beauty possesses the gifts of a prophetess. On the wedding night, she tries to deny him sex and delivers a strange prophecy.
Kraka asks him to postpone the consummation of their union by 3 days, or else their first son would be disabled.
Obviously, Ragnar is crazy in love, and he says a husband should make love to his wife. And of course, they make love.
Kraka is pregnant, and then, problem. Their first son is indeed born with one bone less in the leg, and he will be called Ivar the Boneless.
Despite this infirmity, this son will in turn become a great saga hero. He is described as a brutal and cunning leader who will become one of the most famous Vikings of his time. Once married, Ragnar and Kraka returned to Denmark and ruled together over a community mainly composed of farmers. For when he is not at sea, the Viking is above all a farmer and a family leader.
So, we have to imagine a Viking surrounded by 2 or 3 cows, a few pigs, which are symbols of wealth at the time, and living the life of a peasant with his family.
Responsibilities are equally divided between the man and the woman. The man has the upper hand in all outdoor work, hunting, fishing, construction, agriculture, etc. The woman has the upper hand in everything that happens inside. The workshops, manufacturing, food management, community life management. So, a considerable part of the group's life.
Very often it is associated with the keyring in our imagination that she wears on her belt, which is very practical. A key is used to open a chest, but it also has a very symbolic aspect. It refers precisely to the place of the free woman within the household and more broadly in Scandinavian society.
And then, we must not forget that the men often go on expeditions. And from that moment on, it is the woman who becomes the sole mistress of the house. She is the one who decides everything. These are couples who are very often united and form a whole.
This would tend to prove that in a societal context, women have a real place, a real role to play, and that they are treated with respect. One should not consider Viking women as second- or third-class beings. Not at all.
If women hold an essential place, they are not equal to men and do not have a say in political matters. But they enjoy a certain autonomy, particularly within the couple.
There is not this infinite aspect of marriage that exists among Christians. Men or women, indiscriminately, can ask to divorce their spouse. It is a prerogative that women have. It is a prerogative that men have.
In theory, polygamy is also something that is accepted in Scandinavian societies, but in practice, it is a practice much more likely used by men than by women. Moreover, the Old Norse term used to designate a concubine, Freya, exists only in the feminine. There is no masculine equivalent.
At the time, their enemies liked to describe the Vikings as barbarians, dirty and unkempt, but in reality, men and women were very concerned about their appearance and placed great importance on hygiene.
It is known that they wash regularly, at least once a week. In fact, it is well known that the Vikings are well groomed. They have a comb on their belt next to their sword.
We also know that they took with them tweezers, toothpicks, and ear picks. We can really imagine they were capable of refinement and a lot of personal care.
The Vikings also like to adorn themselves with jewelry that they make themselves. These are true works of art that reflect the wealth of the person wearing them. Some of the most beautiful adornments of this era are today preserved at the National Museum of Denmark and attest to the craftsmanship of Viking artisans.
This is one of the largest collections of Viking craftsmanship that we have here. There are about 3,500 objects, and this showcase contains the most important collection of gold displayed here. It represents more than 3.5 kilograms of Viking gold. One example of this magnificent craftsmanship is these two brooches. They were made from a sheet of gold on which exceptional details were drawn, with great finesse and perfectly symmetrical. It's as if the entire Viking mentality is expressed through these very beautiful pieces of jewelry.
Gold pieces are then reserved for kings and queens, but these oval brooches are also used by Scandinavian women daily in less precious metals. Called fibulae, they are used to fasten clothing and are, for the Vikings, the ultimate symbol of femininity. Kraka is alone in Ragnar's kingdom when she is informed of the terrible death of the children the Viking chief had with his first wife.
And what is astonishing is that Kraka, who is only their stepmother, cries tears that are truly like tears of blood.
She sets out herself with her sons to avenge Ragnar's 2 previous sons. And when she goes on the expedition, she changes her name. She will be called Ranelin. And Ranelin means something very simple and very pragmatic, the one who carries the shield.
In the saga, the Viking queen transforms into a formidable warrior. But what is the reality? What role do women actually play on the battlefields during the Viking era?
What is said in the saga, even if it is a poetic and literary text, also says a lot, or at least enough, about the theme of the truly warrior Scandinavian woman. That is to say, there were certainly women who had the physical courage, the will, and the desire to take up arms and fight alongside their husband, father, or brother.
So we must distinguish the warrior from the fighter. The warrior is the man or woman who makes war their main activity. The fighter, male or female, is very different. It is the one who takes up arms depending on the circumstances, particularly to defend their home, family, harbour, or loved ones.
Viking women therefore know how to handle weapons if circumstances require it. But do they also take part in combat on the same level as men?
The sagas sometimes mention warrior women, who perform marvelously in the midst of battle. But this is something that has often been questioned. There has often been doubt about whether women, given their rather particular status and more domestic roles, actually participated in combat.
Until the day when an exceptional tomb discovered at the site of the ancient city of Birka in Sweden completely overturned what we thought we knew about Viking warriors. An imposing burial chamber with many objects inside that inform us about the life of the deceased and are now preserved at the History Museum in Stockholm.
These are incredible objects. There is a complete set of weapons. We have a sword, an axe that was hung on the belt, here 2 spears and arrowheads. There was probably also a wooden bow. There were finally 2 shields, of which only the round metal pieces that adorn them remain. It is very rare to find so many weapons in a tomb. That's what makes it so special. And when it was discovered, it was, of course, thought to be a man.
It is ultimately the DNA analysis of the skeleton that reveals what no one had considered. This deceased is actually a woman.
This woman must have been in her 30s, but it is unknown what she died of. The study of her bones revealed that there were no traces of injury, which could have proven that she took part in combat, but that does not necessarily mean she was not present on the battlefields. We do not know if she was truly a warrior or if she had such an important social status that they wanted to honor her with all the attributes of a great warrior. In any case, such a discovery changes our view of the Vikings. Who knows what we might still discover in the future?
If today we cannot be certain about her actual involvement on the battlefield, this discovery proves the importance a woman could have in the eyes of the Vikings. Moreover, female figures proudly bearing weapons and shields are essential in Scandinavian mythology, and the most famous of all are undoubtedly the renowned Valkyries.
The Valkyries are winged deities whose main role is to fly over the battlefields, to notice the fighters who have died in the most honorable way, who have distinguished themselves the most in combat.
By the way, Valkyrie literally means she who chooses the dead. So they come to select the most valiant dead and take them to drink mead in Valhalla, something that gives hope to the warrior who might potentially sacrifice his life, with the prospect of ineffable happiness once in paradise.
If we believe certain accounts, Viking warriors even carried representations of Valkyries as protective talismans. Several of these figurines have been found in Scandinavia. This silver pendant, barely 4 centimeters tall, finely crafted, attests to the importance of these deities.
It is the woman, the warrior virgin. That is to say, a character looked upon with respect, with fascination, with admiration. So, it means that in the Scandinavian mental structure, a woman is granted a power that is not only seductive, not only intellectual, but also a symbol of strength.
For nearly 1,000 years, this image of the warrior woman has continuously fueled the fantasies surrounding the Vikings.
There is something in us that remains fascinated by these kinds of powerful figures. It is the woman endowed with masculine skills, strategy, strength, and bravery.
Among the many sons of Ragnar, the most famous are named Bjorn Ironside, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, and Ivar the Boneless, the most strategic of all. These young men learn to navigate from a very young age, because as tradition dictates, to be someone, one must distinguish oneself in great expeditions.
When you are the son of a king, you must show your courage. You must at least match your father.
Ragnar is a hero. He is a great leader. And his sons also have the stature of a great leader. So, they go on an expedition because they want to prove to themselves, to their father, to everyone, that they are heroes just as worthy as he is.
They scoured Sweden. They also went in England, and then they co-aimed to Francia. From Francia, they reached Switzerland.
And they were able to go very far, all the way to Italy. And each time they capture cities, and each time they cover themselves in glory.
They attacked and plundered the village of Luna. And that's where fiction meets reality. Indeed, in 850, around that time, a raid was recorded by a Viking leader in that Italian city, Luna. And they even tried to go down to Rome.
If Ragnar's sons never reached the holy city, other Scandinavians achieved true feats. In search of new lands to colonize, several expeditions are launched towards the north of Europe, in the Orkneys, the Shetlands, the Faroe Islands, then in Iceland and Greenland, where generation after generation, they established colonies.
And from these colonies, one of them, Leif the Lucky, Leif Erikson, leaves Greenland to launch expeditions towards the American continent.
It was long considered a myth or a legend told by very late sagas until excavations revealed, quite late in the 1960s, that there had indeed been Scandinavian settlements.
2 Norwegian archaeologists uncovered an authentic Viking camp in the north of Newfoundland Island.
So, we now know for certain we have archaeological artifacts that prove it. The Vikings discovered, 500 years before Christopher Columbus, the American continent, via this route, Norway, Iceland, Greenland, Labrador.
And what is even crazier than this discovery is how it could evaporate from human consciousness, how it could fundamentally disappear, even though it is something truly exceptional.
But how do Ragnar and the other Viking explorers manage to go so far? In the absence of maps, they demonstrate a great sense of observation and primarily use the surrounding nature to find their way. When they move away from the coasts, the Vikings navigate by dead reckoning. They rely on the sun, currents, and birds. At night, they guide themselves by the moon and stars. According to the sagas, the Vikings also used certain instruments, like this shadow board.
At sea, the sailor placed this shadow board in a bucket of water to ensure it remains perfectly horizontal. If the shadow falls beyond the line, the boat is going too far north. If the shadow falls below the line, the boat is going too far south. So, the end of the shadow must be exactly on the line to indicate to the crew that they are on the right course. But when there is no sun, precisely, we have the sunstone. So in this case, it's an Iceland spar. The principle of the sunstone is to polarize the light through the clouds, manage to locate the position of the sun. Like today, when the sky is completely overcast, the sailor takes out his sunstone, and thanks to this ability to polarize the light, the sun appears through the stone.
If we know today that such tools existed, they were rare and not very precise. But isn't the true achievement of the ancient Scandinavians having dared, more than any other people before them, to set sail without knowing what awaited them?
One of the main qualities or characteristics of the ancient Scandinavians is probably their curiosity, their adventurous spirit, their very enterprising nature as well, and this desire to always see beyond what is on the other side of the sea.
While he is in Denmark, Ragnar is told about the exploits of his sons, now known throughout all of Scandinavia. Very quickly, jealousy eats away at the Viking leader, who fears seeing his son's fame surpass his own. He then imagines a crazy plan.
Ragnar decides to set out on an expedition once again, and this time to achieve a feat like no other.
Ragnar wants to show his strength, and with 2 or 3 ships, but no more, he wants to take over England all by himself. Why not? Who will dissuade him? It's the sweet Kraka, that is to say, his wife, who tells him, "It's madness, my lord, it's madness."
And he replies that it has never been done, and that it's a way to achieve an exceptional feat that will allow him to remain in everyone's memory.
And at that moment, he sets sail for England.
With his men, he heads towards Northumbria, in the northeast of present-day England, where King Ella reigns. For Ragnar, this kingdom is an ideal gateway to then conquer all of England.
But the problem is that it doesn't happen as the great Ragnar imagined. That is to say, not only does he not take England, but he is defeated.
Ragnar has been taken prisoner, but Ella does not know it is Ragnar, and Ragnar refuses to speak. He then decides to execute his prisoner by throwing him into a pit.
It is at this moment that Ragnar is said to have composed his famous funeral song. It is a long recitative of all his war exploits and all his murders. Because in fact, that's it. It's a list of murders and how good it was to bathe in the blood of his enemies.
And the poem also ends with a very famous line, which is Lendiskag Deja, meaning, "I'll die laughing."
Ella realizes that it is indeed Ragnar he is killing, but it is too late.
He says to himself, "My God, what will be the reaction of the children, of Ragnar's sons? It will be terrible."
In retaliation, Ragnar's sons attack the kingdom of Northumbria in 866. After a merciless battle, King Ella is captured and sentenced to death. The punishment is terrifying.
They dared to kill Ragnar, who is still the King of Kings, who is still an extraordinary figure, who is almost a hero equal to the gods, and well, for an abominable murder, an abominable punishment.
The king is tied up. His back is cut open. The ribs are sawed. The lungs are pulled out and spread like the wings of an eagle. This is what is called the blood eagle. We know that unfortunately, human imagination is limitless when it comes to making others suffer. And here, we have a particularly striking example.
We do not know where Ragnar might have been buried, but archaeology regularly reveals sites that inform us about the funeral practices of the ancient Scandinavians, like this impressive Viking cemetery in the far north of Denmark, reserved at the time for men and women of high rank.
We are here at Lindholmhøje. It is a necropolis with more than 700 Viking graves dating from the 4th to the 10th century AD. On this one, for example, you can see that the stones form a boat, with this one representing the stern and this one the bow. You have to imagine a cremation here in the center. That's where the deceased lay. They would set it on fire and the body would go up in smoke. The boat is obviously important for the Vikings. In this life it is a means of transport, but it also symbolizes the journey to the afterlife.
At the time, the size of the tomb varied according to the importance of the deceased. In Denmark, archaeological excavations have thus uncovered graves of exceptional size, several hundreds of meters long. The most important people can also be buried in a real ship, like in the Oseberg grave, discovered in 1904. In Norway, it contained a sumptuous Viking ship 22 meters long, filled with riches and dating from the 9th century.
The Oseberg ship is not just a small fishing boat, it is a magnificent ceremonial ship that was buried underground. So, they gave up this ship that must have cost a fortune. It is truly a remarkable tomb, both because of the ship, its exceptional size, and the presence of all these objects.
This tomb remains today one of the most remarkable discoveries related to the Viking era. Such splendor allows us to imagine what the tomb of a great leader like Ragnar Lodbrok might have been.
To bury a character as significant as Ragnar, one can undoubtedly imagine a funeral that would truly surpass all previous burials of Viking kings. The most beautiful of ship tombs, the largest, the most lavish. Maybe one day we will have the chance to discover a similar tomb. It would be on the level of the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb.
We are in the Seine Valley. Since Ragnar's attack on Paris in 845, the life of the Vikings has changed considerably.
The Vikings at that time no longer truly make clear attacks where they leave immediately. No, now, they almost live on sight. They occupy entire swathes of territory. They are already permanently settled in certain areas. Here, we are really dealing with armies that are almost permanently there and go from city to plunder, to take. But it is no longer so easy to acquire wealth since they have already plundered a lot.
But on this day, the 24th of November, 885, an army of tens of thousands of Vikings decides to take up arms again to carry out a large-scale raid.
A Viking fleet of 700 ships, which is enormous, arrives in front of the walls of Paris, not to pillage Paris, but to pass through and head to Provence and Burgundy to pillage those regions. And there, the personalities who lead the city of Paris oppose letting them pass.
The Franks know how to organize themselves better. They have built fortified bridges. They are capable of responding more effectively, and this complicates the lives of the Vikings. The supreme leader of this army decides to lay siege to the city. There's been several attempts, but all fail. And this lasts until August of the following year.
Finally, the Franks give in and pay a heavy tribute of 700 pounds of silver to the Vikings, who lift the siege of Paris and seek to conduct raids elsewhere.
Among these Vikings who are attacking Paris in 885, there is, it is believed, a Viking named Rollo, who becomes increasingly important until 911, when he will attack the city of Chartres.
But this time again, the warriors fail to take the city. The new king of the Franks, Charles the Simple, repels the Viking offensive. Rollo retreats to the banks of the Seine. He realizes that the raids no longer have as much future as in Ragnar's time. They also feel that these men no longer want to return to Scandinavia, but aspire to a more prosperous and gentler life.
Roland understands that he needs to find a way to settle down. And on the other side, it's also in the interest of the Frankish king.
And there, Charles the Simple might have thought by saying, "What can I do that is new to guarantee peace for myself? I can no longer endure these perpetual abuses, these perpetual pillages." And if the miracle solution was precisely to give land,
The outlines of this new land is negotiated in the autumn of 911 in the famous Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte. It is on the banks of this river that the historic meeting between Charles the Simple and Rollo took place.
From this date, this small river will become a border. This is where it all began. This is where Normandy was born. You have to imagine the Vikings here with their leader on this bank where we are. And on the other bank, the Franks with King Charles the Simple who are waiting. And then, at some point, Roland crossed to meet Charles the Simple for the first time.
This major meeting in the history of France is today immortalized in the Notre Dame Church of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte. While the oldest parts of the religious building already date back to the 9th century, this stained glass window created in 1913 tells us the story of the event.
Through the image, we have a true depiction of what the agreement between the two princes might have been. So, on the left, we see Charles the Simple with a crown on his head that faces Roland, on the right with his sword, in front of a kneeling man who is very likely presenting a written agreement stating that Charles the Simple grants Roland the lands from the Epte to the sea. Modern historians today think that it roughly corresponds to the current departments of Seine-Maritime and Uri. Charles the Simple explains that he granted lands to Rollo and his companions for the preservation of the kingdom. That simply means that his main goal in this matter is to prevent other Vikings from sailing up the Seine and threatening Paris again. So it is an insurance taken out for the very survival of his kingdom. And one of the conditions of this agreement, well, is that Rollo converts to Christianity. And in the upper part, we can see precisely the baptism of Rollo that took place in Rouen. There, we see him kneeling. So it reminds a little of the baptism of Clovis, when St. Remigius says the famous phrase, "Bend your stiff neck, burn what you have worshipped, and worship what you have burned." Well, we have exactly the same thing here, about 5 centuries later.
With this baptism, Rollo solidifies his position and becomes Count of Rouen. He and his men are no longer outlaws, pirates, but are now part of the Frankish people.
The Vikings who settled in what becomes Normandy gradually adopt the religion, lifestyles, and language of the local populations.
In just one generation, a good part of the Scandinavians spoke the Roman language and no longer spoke Norse.
The Vikings trade the sword for the plough. They settle down, become wiser, calm down. The Vikings become Norman, men of the north.
The choice made by some kings to convert to Christianity is partly a religious choice, but it is also largely a political one. The first to do so was Harald Gormson, nicknamed Harold Bluetooth among the Danes. He saw it as a way to justify the presence of a unique royal power among the Danes. The goal was to have only one king, as there is only one God in the heavens.
Kings now have often established an administrative form closer to the continental ones, meaning with taxes, duties, and levies. So much so that the Vikings no longer even need to go looking for loot. The king or the jarl has the money on site directly from his subjects. It's the end of the Viking raids. It goes without saying.
And this end is officially dated to the 25th of September 1066 at Stamford Bridge in England. This raid is led by a Norwegian king who dies on the battlefield, leading to the defeat of his warriors. Since then, This military route is considered the last Viking attack in history. After almost 3 centuries of heroic existence, the great exploits of Viking leaders like Ragnar fall into oblivion. Their ships sink, their wooden dwellings disappear, all their heritage vanishes.
And it takes centuries and centuries until the 19th century, which is long for the Viking fantasy, the Viking epic, to re-emerge in the collective memory of people.
There was a first major Viking trend during the Romantic era, notably when Richard Wagner staged his operas and the first clichés that would very lastingly shape our imagination, particularly the famous horned helmet, which we owe largely to Richard Wagner.
And it's around that time that people rediscover the great sagas. Now that's the stuff dreams are made of, for sure. Great valiant tales. It transports you.
It's sailing to the adventure with a capital A. It's the breath of the open sea. It's the epic side, the grandiose side that you only find in their saga.
I would say that Ragnar embodies everything a free man can hope to do. He is a man without limits, a man without borders, a man of all possibilities.
Anyone would want to be a bit like Ragnar Lodbrok and live with the wind in your hair, setting off to conquer, who knows, a new continent, if it were still possible.